A single mistake could have doomed the mission. A single message could turn the tide. In 1942, as Midway became the epicenter of a desperate naval clash, George Anderson, a modest radio operator, faced the most critical hours of his life. What he found in a jumble of coded signals wasn't just information. It was the key to victory. Step inside the thrilling untold story of the man behind the battle's turning point. Before we continue, friends, I kindly ask you to subscribe to my channel. It takes just a second for you, but it gives me incredible motivation to keep creating these videos. I'd also greatly appreciate your comments. Thank you for your support. And now, let's dive back into the story. June 1942. The vast expanse of the Pacific shimmered under the summer sun, concealing both the stillness of nature and the tension of impending battle. The world stood on the brink of a decisive moment. Japan, emboldened by its swift victory since Pearl Harbor, set its sights on Midway, a tiny atoll with an outsized strategic significance. To Japan, this was the key to neutralizing American naval power. To America, it was the line that could not be crossed. Amidst this turmoil, a young radio operator named George Skipper Anderson prepared for what would become the defining moment of his life. A quiet man with an unyielding sense of duty, Anderson had spent the last year honing his skills in radio interception. In a world of battleships and bombers, his weapon was the hum of a radio set, his ammunition the strings of coded messages he fought to unravel. The stakes could not have been higher. Intelligence had revealed that a major Japanese fleet was moving toward Midway, but the exact target and timing of the attack remained unclear. American forces, led by Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, scrambled to prepare. The pressure on the intelligence teams was immense. Success depended on their ability to piece together the enemy's plan, a task akin to assembling a puzzle in the dark. In the dimly lit confines of a communications center, Anderson and his colleagues worked tirelessly. Each intercepted transmission was a potential clue, a thread that might lead to the truth. The air was thick with urgency. The radio crackled constantly, and every deciphered word carried the weight of countless lives. Yet, for all their efforts, uncertainty hung over the operation like a storm cloud. Anderson's focus never wavered. He understood that even the smallest fragment of information could shift the tide of war. The monotony of listening to endless static was broken only by moments of revelation, rare and precious. It was in one of these moments that Anderson caught a message, a transmission that, though cryptic, hinted at something critical. He passed it up the chain, his instincts telling him it was important. The message pointed to a specific term, AF. Analysts had long debated its meaning, suspecting it referred to a key location. It was Anderson's interception that provided the missing context, a breakthrough that clarified AF as Midway. This revelation electrified the command center. Suddenly, what had been a foggy landscape of speculation came into sharp focus. The Japanese were indeed targeting Midway, and they were coming soon. As the news traveled to Admiral Nimitz, a plan began to take shape. The Americans would set a trap, luring the Japanese into a battle they believed they could win. It was a gamble, a high-stakes chess move on the vast board of the Pacific. But for all the strategic brilliance that would follow, it was Anderson's work that had lit the spark. Somewhere across the ocean, the Japanese fleet advanced, unaware that their secret was no longer safe. The stage was set for a confrontation that would decide the fate of the Pacific and, perhaps, the war itself. And at the heart of it all was a young man with a radio, a man who had already begun to change history. The attack on Pearl Harbor had shattered the illusion of American invulnerability and left the Pacific Fleet grappling with the grim reality of war. In its aftermath, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, recently appointed commander of the Pacific Fleet, faced a Herculean task of rebuilding morale and reshaping strategy. While others saw only devastation, Nimitz saw an opportunity, a chance to turn American ingenuity and resilience into tools of victory. Midway, a remote atoll of coral and sand, became the fulcrum of this vision. Located roughly halfway between Asia and North America, it was strategically vital. To the Japanese, it offered a platform for launching further offensives against Hawaii and the American West Coast. To the Americans, it was a shield that could not be allowed to fall. Recognizing its importance, Nimitz ordered its defenses reinforced, turning the tiny atoll into a bastion of resistance. However, the American war effort was hampered by a critical flaw: intelligence. Unlike the Japanese, whose cryptographers had cracked many Allied codes, American intelligence lagged behind. The process of deciphering Japanese naval communications was slow and error-prone, relying heavily on manual analysis. It was a race against time, and every delay risked disaster. Within this context, the work of operators like George Anderson became indispensable. Stationed at Pearl Harbor, Anderson was part of a small, dedicated team tasked with intercepting and analyzing Japanese transmissions. The monotonous hours spent at his radio set belied the critical importance of his work. Each signal, no matter how trivial it seemed, was a potential key to unraveling the enemy's plans. Anderson, driven by a personal need to prove himself, threw himself into his duties with a quiet intensity. The events of Pearl Harbor had left a mark on him, fueling his determination to make a difference. For him, this was more than a job, it was a mission. Yet, the pressure was immense. Mistakes were not an option, and success often came at the cost of sleep and sanity. As the Japanese fleet prepared for its assault on Midway, American commanders debated their response. Some argued for caution, suggesting that the Pacific Fleet was still too weak to risk an open battle. Others, including Nimitz, believed that the opportunity to strike a decisive blow could not be ignored. The discovery of the Japanese plan, however incomplete, gave them an edge they could not afford to waste. These debates underscored a deeper tension within the American war effort, a clash between caution and boldness, between those who sought to conserve resources and those who demanded action. For Nimitz, the decision was clear. He would gamble on the ingenuity of his commanders, the courage of his pilots, and the dedication of men like Anderson. Midway would not fall without a fight. Behind the scenes, Anderson and his colleagues worked tirelessly to provide the information that would tip the scales. Each intercepted signal brought them closer to understanding the Japanese strategy. Yet, even as their efforts bore fruit, doubts lingered. Could the Americans truly match the might of the Japanese Navy? Could a hastily assembled fleet stand against the veterans of Pearl Harbor and the Coral Sea? As the deadline approached, the tension became palpable. In the dim glow of the communications center, Anderson monitored his equipment with unwavering focus. Every crackle of static, every coded burst of sound could hold the key to victory or defeat. And in the quiet moments between transmissions, he found himself wrestling with the enormity of his task. Failure was unthinkable. Success was uncertain. All he could do was listen and hope. Outside, the Pacific stretched endlessly toward the horizon, a theater of war both vast and intimate. Men prepared for battle in ships, on airstrips, and in bunkers, their fates intertwined in ways they could scarcely imagine. For them, Midway was a point on a map. For Anderson, it was a lifeline, a fragile thread connecting him to the men whose lives depended on his skill. And as the first glimmers of dawn broke over the ocean, he resolved to see that thread through to the end. The Japanese codes were a labyrinth, complex patterns of numbers and letters designed to conceal intentions and plans. For months, American cryptographers had worked to penetrate this cipher, chipping away at the edges until they finally uncovered a crack. The key came in the form of a fragmentary message, AF. It was George Anderson who intercepted this vital clue, though its significance was not immediately apparent. The team of codebreakers in Pearl Harbor, led by Commander Joseph Rockefort, had long suspected AF, referred to a specific location, but confirmation eluded them. As Anderson relayed the intercepted messages, the cryptographers went to work, piecing together scraps of information in an effort to decipher the Japanese plans. The breakthrough came when an ingenious ruse was deployed. A false message was sent from Midway reporting a water shortage. When Japanese communications mirrored this concern, confirming AF as Midway, it was a triumph of both intellect and strategy. This revelation electrified the Pacific Command. Admiral Nimitz, seated in his sparsely furnished office, absorbed the significance of the discovery. A decisive battle was now not only possible, it was inevitable. Nimitz, known for his calm demeanor and strategic foresight, recognized the opportunity to deal a crippling blow to Japan's naval supremacy. But the risks were staggering. The American fleet, still reeling from the losses at Pearl Harbor, would face a larger and more experienced enemy force. The decision to confront the Japanese at Midway was not without its detractors. Some within the ranks argued that engaging the enemy so soon was reckless, given the disparity in strength. Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, commanding the American carrier force, voiced concerns about the vulnerability of the carriers, while others questioned whether the intelligence was reliable enough to justify such a gamble. Yet Nimitz, trusting in the brilliance of his codebreakers and the courage of his men, committed to the plan. Coordinating the American response required extraordinary effort. The fleet was dispersed across thousands of miles of ocean, its movements constrained by limited fuel and time. Pilots trained relentlessly for the high-stakes confrontation, while engineers worked around the clock to ready the ships for battle. The logistical challenges were daunting, but the resolve was unshakable. For Anderson, the days leading up to the battle were a blur of activity. The communications center buzzed with urgency as intercepted signals were decoded and analyzed. Every new piece of information was a potential game changer. Anderson's role was pivotal. His quick hands and sharp mind ensured that nothing was missed. He understood that the fate of the fleet, and perhaps the war itself, hinged on their ability to anticipate the enemy's moves. Despite the pressure, Anderson found moments of clarity amidst the chaos. He knew the Japanese fleet would not expect their codes to be broken, nor would they anticipate the American forces lying in wait. It was a rare advantage, one that he and his team were determined to exploit fully. As the intercepted transmissions painted a clearer picture of the Japanese strategy, a sense of purpose solidified among the American command. The Japanese plan, audacious and meticulously coordinated, aimed to lure the remnants of the Pacific Fleet into a trap. 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, formed the backbone of the operation. Their mission was to neutralize Midway as a threat and then eliminate any American resistance in the region. The scale of their ambition was matched only by the confidence in their superiority. But Anderson and his colleagues had turned the tables. By revealing the true nature of AF and decoding critical details of the Japanese approach, they gave the Americans an unprecedented advantage. As the fleet moved into position, Anderson could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. He was part of something larger than himself. A battle not just for territory, but for the survival of freedom in the Pacific. On the eve of the confrontation, the tension was palpable. Ships steamed toward their assigned positions, while reconnaissance aircraft scoured the ocean for signs of the enemy. In the communications center, Anderson continued his vigil, ears attuned to the static-laden whispers of the enemy. Every intercepted word brought them closer to the moment of reckoning. Anderson's thoughts drifted to the men aboard the carriers, the pilots who would soon face the fury of the Japanese fleet. He wondered if they knew how much their chances of survival depended on the work of men like him, unseen, unsung, but indispensable. He pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on his task. There was no room for doubt, no margin for error. The battle was coming, and he intended to ensure they were ready. At dawn on June 4th, 1942, the skies above Midway lit up with the first flashes of battle. Japanese bombers, sleek and menacing, roared over the atoll, their engines drowning out the cries of alarm from American defenders. The assault was precise and relentless. Explosions tore through the ground installations as the defenders scrambled to fight back with whatever anti-aircraft artillery they had. Smoke rose in thick plumes, obscuring the island's horizon and signaling the arrival of one of the most pivotal battles of the Pacific War. From his cramped position in the communications center, George Anderson monitored the chaos unfolding miles away. Though he wasn't on the front lines, The responsibility weighing on him was just as heavy. His radio was alive with chatter, desperate calls for reinforcements, warnings of incoming attacks, and updates from reconnaissance planes shadowing the Japanese fleet. Anderson's task was to ensure every piece of vital information reached its destination, coordinating the American response with precision and speed. The first American counterattack came in the form of torpedo bombers launched from the carriers Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet. Courageous but outdated, these aircraft struggled against the highly maneuverable Japanese Zero fighters. One after another, the lumbering torpedo planes fell from the sky, their crews making the ultimate sacrifice in the hope of landing a decisive blow. By the end of the sortie, over 80% of the torpedo squadrons were lost, and the Japanese carriers remained unscathed. The loss was devastating, but it wasn't the end. Unbeknownst to the Japanese, a second wave of American aircraft was already en route, this time carrying the lethal precision of dive bombers. These planes, flown by seasoned aviators, had been vectored into position through meticulous coordination. Anderson played a crucial role in relaying the information that guided them to their targets. His steady voice cut through the tension, providing the pilots with updates on enemy positions and weather conditions. As the dive bombers approached, the Japanese fleet was momentarily caught off guard. Believing the torpedo bombers to be the full extent of the American assault, their carriers were in the process of refueling and rearming aircraft for a counterstrike. It was a fatal vulnerability, and the American pilots seized the opportunity. Plummeting from the sky at nearly vertical angles, they released their payloads with deadly accuracy. The first explosion ripped through the flight deck of the carrier Akagi, igniting fuel and munitions in a catastrophic chain reaction. Moments later, similar fates befell Kaga and Soryu. The sky above the Japanese fleet turned black with smoke as flames consumed the once proud carriers. The destruction was swift and absolute, a testament to the precision and bravery of the American aviators. Anderson listened intently to the reports coming in, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and disbelief. For the first time in months, the balance of power in the Pacific seemed to shift. Yet the battle was far from over. The Japanese carrier Hiryu, still intact, launched a desperate counterattack. Its planes honed in on the Yorktown, scoring direct hits that left the American carrier listing heavily. The loss of the Yorktown would be a severe blow, but it was a testament to the crew's resilience that they managed to keep her afloat, buying precious time for the rest of the fleet. Back in the communications center, Anderson worked tirelessly to keep the flow of information uninterrupted. His hands moved instinctively over the equipment, adjusting dials and scribbling notes as he relayed updates to commanders and pilots. There was no time to dwell on the unfolding drama, only the relentless drive to ensure that every message reached its destination. His calm demeanor under pressure became a source of reassurance to those around him, a quiet reminder that they were not fighting alone. The climax of the day came with the final assault on Hiryu. Guided by intelligence that pinpointed its location, American dive bombers once again took to the skies. Anderson's voice crackled over the radio, coordinating the strike and ensuring that no detail was overlooked. The attack was as devastating as the first, reducing Hiryu to a burning wreck and eliminating the last of the Japanese carriers from the fight. As the sun set over the Pacific, the waters around Midway were littered with the remnants of battle, burned-out planes, debris from shattered ships, and the haunting silence of lives lost. For the Americans, it was a hard-fought victory, one that came at a great cost but carried even greater significance. For Anderson, it was a moment of quiet reflection. He knew the battle wasn't over. There would be more challenges to come, but for now, he allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. They had turned the tide, and for the first time in months, hope began to bloom on the horizon. Smoke billowed into the sky as the battle reached its crescendo. 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, had been turned into infernos, their decks splintered, their hulls listing heavily. Yet amidst the destruction, the Hiryu remained afloat and operational, a lone beacon of defiance. The Japanese knew their position was tenuous, but they weren't ready to concede defeat. Hiryu's commander, Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, embodied the spirit of Bushido, prioritizing duty and sacrifice over personal safety. He ordered a counterstrike with every available aircraft. The target was Yorktown, the American carrier that had played a central role in the earlier attacks. Yamaguchi's gamble was audacious, and his pilots responded with unrelenting determination. In the communication center, George Anderson intercepted the chatter of the advancing Japanese planes. The urgency in his voice as he relayed the warning to the fleet underscored the gravity of the situation. On the deck of Yorktown, sailors braced for the impending assault. Anti-aircraft gunners stood ready, their eyes scanning the skies for the telltale silhouettes of incoming bombers. The first wave of Japanese planes descended with surgical precision. Bombs and torpedoes tore into Yorktown's hull, creating a cascade of destruction. Fires erupted below deck, and columns of smoke blackened the air. Yet, the crew fought valiantly, quelling the flames and keeping the carrier afloat. Anderson's transmissions provided critical updates, ensuring reinforcements could respond effectively. As Yorktown struggled, the battle intensified. A second wave of Japanese aircraft launched from Hiryu, determined to deliver the final blow. The carrier endured yet another barrage, and this time the damage was catastrophic. The once proud vessel was left crippled, its fate sealed. Yorktown's crew began the grim task of evacuation, their expressions a mixture of sorrow and resolve. But the sacrifice was not in vain. The resilience of Yorktown's defenders bought crucial time for the American fleet to locate Hiryu. In the radio room, Anderson's focus was unyielding. Through static and interference, he pieced together the fragments of intelligence that revealed the Japanese carrier's position. His transmission was clear and precise, a lifeline to the dive bombers preparing for the final strike. The American pilots launched with a singular purpose: to neutralize the last threat. Flying low to avoid detection, they closed in on Hiryu, whose deck was now a hive of activity as planes were refueled and rearmed. The Japanese were preparing for yet another assault, unaware that their time was running out. The attack came swiftly and decisively. Bombs rained down on Hiryu, triggering explosions that tore through the carrier structure. Flames engulfed the vessel, and within moments, it became a sinking mass of steel and fire. For Admiral Yamaguchi, the defeat was a bitter end to a battle fought with valor. Refusing evacuation, he chose to go down with his ship, a final act of loyalty to the Emperor. Back on the American side, the tension in the communication center gave way to subdued relief. Anderson exhaled deeply, the weight of his responsibility momentarily lifting. The destruction of Hiryu marked the turning point. The Japanese fleet, once dominant, was now in retreat. Midway had been saved, but the cost was immense. The hours that followed were filled with a somber sense of accomplishment. Reports of casualties and damage trickled in, painting a picture of the human toll. Yet there was also a quiet pride among the men who had fought so fiercely. They had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious. For Anderson, the battle was a testament to the power of information and communication. His role may not have been glamorous, but it was indispensable. As he reflected on the events of the day, he knew that his work had made a difference. The tide of the war had shifted, and he had played a part in that change. The chaos of battle began to subside, replaced by the grim realities of its aftermath. The Pacific, now littered with debris, bore silent witness to the heroism and tragedy that had unfolded. For George Anderson, the hours following the destruction of Hiryu were no less critical than those that had preceded it. The communication lines buzzed with reports, updates, and urgent requests for coordination as the remnants of the American fleet regrouped. His work was far from over. Anderson's role in the strategy that had unfolded was undeniable. His quick thinking and unyielding focus during the most critical hours of the battle ensured that vital intelligence reached those who needed it most. Every command, every adjustment in strategy hinged on the seamless flow of information that Anderson and his team had provided. It was a triumph not of brute force, but of intellect and precision. The weight of responsibility was something Anderson had carried since the attack on Pearl Harbor. For him, the Battle of Midway was not just about defending an island or halting the Japanese advance. It was personal. The memory of that fateful day in December 1941 lingered in his mind, a vivid reminder of what was at stake. He had lost friends in the attack, men who had shared his hopes and fears, and their absence was a wound that time could not heal. This personal connection to the war fueled Anderson's determination. He approached every intercepted signal, every decoded message, with the knowledge that lives depended on his actions. It was a burden that many would have found overwhelming, but for Anderson, it was a source of strength. His ability to remain calm under pressure, to make decisions with clarity even in the most chaotic moments, set him apart. Recognition of his contributions came quietly, as it often did for those who worked behind the scenes. A brief word of thanks from a commander, a knowing nod from a fellow operator. These small gestures carried immense weight. Anderson didn't seek accolades. His satisfaction came from knowing he had done his part. Still, there were moments when he allowed himself to reflect on the significance of his work. In the grand tapestry of the war, his role was a thread, but one that had helped to hold the fabric together. The Battle of Midway also underscored the vital role of communication in modern warfare. The ability to intercept, decode, and act on enemy transmissions had turned the tide of the conflict. It was a lesson that would shape military strategy for decades to come. Anderson, though humble about his achievements, recognized the broader implications of their success. The victory at Midway was a testament to the power of information, a reminder that wars are won not only on the battlefield, but also in the minds of those who plan and execute them. As the American fleet began the arduous task of assessing the damage and tending to the wounded, Anderson found himself reflecting on the sacrifices that had been made. The loss of Yorktown weighed heavily on everyone. It was more than just a ship. It was a symbol of American resilience, a reminder of what they were fighting for. The men who had given their lives in its defense had done so with courage and honor, and their memory would not be forgotten. Amidst the aftermath, Anderson received a rare opportunity to meet Admiral Chester Nimitz. The Admiral, known for his keen intellect and steady leadership, expressed his gratitude to Anderson and his team. Nimitz understood the significance of their work, and his words carried a sincerity that resonated deeply. For Anderson, it was a moment of validation, a reminder that even in the shadows, his efforts had made a difference. The victory at Midway was a turning point in the Pacific War, but for Anderson, it was also a deeply personal moment. It was a chance to honor the memory of those who had been lost, to reaffirm his commitment to the cause, and to find meaning in the chaos. As he looked out over the vast expanse of the ocean, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had played a role in something greater than himself. As the remnants of the Japanese fleet retreated, the vast Pacific seemed eerily quiet, broken only by the occasional crackle of distant radio transmissions and the hum of American reconnaissance planes. The Battle of Midway had ended, but its echoes lingered in the minds of those who had fought and won. For the men aboard the American ships, the victory brought a mixture of relief, sorrow, and reflection. The significance of the battle was not lost on anyone. Midway had been a gamble, a desperate attempt to halt the Japanese advance, and it had succeeded against all odds. The cost, however, was high. Yorktown, a symbol of American perseverance, lay at the bottom of the Pacific, along with many of her brave crew. Survivors from the stricken carrier shared harrowing tales of the final hours, of men banding together to save their comrades, of desperate firefighting efforts, and of the ultimate sacrifice made by so many. For George Anderson, the aftermath of the battle was bittersweet. The sense of accomplishment was tempered by the knowledge of what had been lost. Messages of congratulations poured into the communication center, but Anderson found himself haunted by the voices that would never speak again. Among the casualties were friends he had trained alongside, men who had shared his hopes and fears in the early days of the war. Their absence was a stark reminder of the price of victory. Despite the losses, there was no denying the strategic impact of Midway. The Japanese fleet, once the dominant force in the Pacific, had suffered a crippling blow. 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were lost, along with hundreds of experienced pilots and sailors. It was a setback from which the Imperial Navy would never fully recover. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, the tide of the war had turned decisively in favor of the Allies. The emotional moment of realization came as the American fleet regrouped. Sailors gathered on decks to survey the wreckage and share their stories. There was laughter, subdued but genuine, as they recounted moments of bravery and luck. There were tears, too, as the names of the fallen were read aloud. Anderson, usually reserved, found himself drawn into these conversations, his quiet presence a source of comfort to his comrades. Amid the camaraderie, there were practical challenges to address. The damaged ships required urgent repairs, and the wounded needed care. The logistics of evacuating the injured and salvaging what could be saved tested the fleet's resilience. Anderson played a role in coordinating these efforts, his skills as a communicator proving invaluable in the chaotic days following the battle. The strategic importance of Midway could not be overstated. By halting the Japanese advance, the Americans had preserved their foothold in the Pacific. Midway became a symbol of resilience and resourcefulness, a testament to what could be achieved when intelligence, strategy, and courage converged. For Admiral Chester Nimitz, the victory validated his decision to gamble on the insights provided by his codebreakers and the bravery of his men. Anderson took quiet pride in his contribution. The intercepted messages, the hours spent decoding and relaying critical information, they had made a difference. Yet he knew that the battle's outcome was not his alone. It was the result of countless acts of heroism, of men like the dive bombers who had braved relentless enemy fire, of sailors who had fought to save their ships, and of commanders who had trusted their instincts in the face of uncertainty. As the fleet prepared to leave the waters around Midway, Anderson found a moment of solitude. Standing on the deck, he looked out at the horizon, where the sky met the sea in an endless expanse. The war was far from over, but for the first time, he felt a sense of hope. The sacrifices of Midway would not be in vain. They had proven that even against a formidable enemy, victory was possible. The battle's legacy would endure, not just in the annals of history, but in the hearts of those who had lived through it. For Anderson, Midway was a turning point, a moment that defined his role in the war and gave meaning to his efforts. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the Pacific in hues of gold and crimson, he resolved to carry the memory of Midway with him, a reminder of the power of courage and determination. The victory at Midway sent ripples far beyond the confines of the Pacific. Across the United States, news of the battle brought a surge of hope and a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time since the attack on Pearl Harbor, Americans felt that the tide had turned in their favor. In small towns and bustling cities alike, people gathered around radios, listening intently as broadcasters recounted the details of the heroic stand at Midway. The courage of the sailors, pilots, and codebreakers inspired a nation determined to prevail. For the Japanese, the loss was a bitter pill to swallow. In Tokyo, the Imperial General Staff grappled with the implications of their defeat. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind the attack on Pearl Harbor, faced harsh criticism from his peers. Despite his strategic brilliance, Yamamoto had underestimated the resilience and resourcefulness of his enemy. The failure at Midway exposed flaws in Japanese planning and intelligence, setting the stage for further setbacks in the Pacific. One critical mistake lay in Japan's over-reliance on secrecy. Believing their codes to be unbreakable, Japanese planners had failed to anticipate the possibility of American interception. The role of George Anderson and his fellow codebreakers became a stark reminder of how technology and intelligence could alter the course of war. Through painstaking effort and innovation, they had turned the enemy's greatest strength, their sense of invulnerability, into a weakness. The contrast between the leadership styles of Admiral Chester Nimitz and Admiral Yamamoto was another factor in the outcome of the battle. Nimitz's approach was marked by pragmatism and a willingness to take calculated risks. He placed immense trust in his subordinates, empowering them to make decisions in the heat of battle. Yamamoto, on the other hand, operated with a rigid hierarchy that left little room for adaptation. While his strategic vision was unparalleled, his inability to respond flexibly to unforeseen challenges proved costly. For Anderson, the lessons of Midway extended beyond the battlefield. The triumph was a testament to the power of teamwork and the extraordinary capabilities of ordinary individuals. In the cramped confines of the radio room, Anderson had witnessed firsthand the dedication and ingenuity of his colleagues. Each intercepted signal, each decoded message was a small victory in its own right, a piece of a larger puzzle that ultimately led to success. The technological innovations of the time played a pivotal role in shaping the outcome of the battle. Radar, still a relatively new technology, provided American forces with a critical edge. Coupled with the work of codebreakers, these advancements underscore the importance of staying ahead in the realm of military technology. Midway became a case study in the integration of intelligence and strategy, influencing military doctrine for generations to come. Yet amidst the strategic analysis and technological advancements, the human element of the battle remained central. The bravery of the pilots who faced overwhelming odds, the resilience of the sailors who fought to save their ships, and the determination of the codebreakers who worked tirelessly behind the scenes all spoke to the indomitable spirit of those involved. It was a reminder that wars are not won by machines alone, but by the people who operate them. As the war continued, the lessons of Midway informed American strategy. The victory bolstered the confidence of military planners and laid the groundwork for future successes in the Pacific theater. The island-hopping campaign that followed was built on the foundation of Midway, as the Allies sought to reclaim territory and push back the Japanese forces. For Anderson, the impact of Midway was deeply personal. It was a moment that defined his role in the war, a validation of the countless hours he had spent hunched over radios and decoding machines. The battle reinforced his belief in the power of communication and intelligence, and it strengthened his resolve to continue the fight. The broader context of Midway extended beyond the military sphere. It was a victory that resonated with the American public, uniting a nation weary from the strain of war. It inspired a sense of collective purpose and a belief in the possibility of triumph against formidable odds. For Anderson and his comrades, it was a reminder of why they fought, a cause greater than themselves, a future worth protecting. For George Anderson, life after the Battle of Midway was anything but ordinary. As the war continued, he remained an integral part of the Navy's intelligence operations. His skills as a radio operator and codebreaker became even more refined, and his reputation grew quietly among those who understood the value of his contributions. But George, ever humble, seldom spoke of his role in the turning point of the Pacific War. To him, the victory belonged to everyone who had fought, deciphered, or supported the effort. After the war, George transitioned into civilian life. He returned to his hometown, where he was greeted as a quiet hero. His neighbors knew of his service, though the full extent of his role remained classified for years. George took up a job as an electrical engineer, leveraging the technical skills he had honed during the war. Yet, he carried the weight of his experiences with him, a reminder of the lives lost and the stakes of those fateful days in 1942. As the years passed, the Battle of Midway became the subject of countless books, documentaries, and films. Historians hailed it as one of the most significant naval engagements in history. George's contributions were eventually declassified, and his name appeared in records and analyses, highlighting his pivotal role in the victory. Despite this recognition, George shied away from the spotlight, choosing instead to focus on mentoring younger generations who shared his interest in technology and communication. In the late 1960s, George attended a reunion of Midway veterans. It was a solemn yet joyous occasion, filled with shared memories and quiet reverence for those who had not returned. Among the attendees were pilots who had flown the perilous missions, sailors who had manned the decks under fire, and fellow codebreakers who had worked tirelessly to uncover the enemy's plans. George was surprised by the number of men who approached him, expressing their gratitude for the intelligence that had guided their actions. The Battle of Midway also found its way into classrooms and historical texts. Students learned about the audacious decisions of Admiral Chester Nimitz, the resilience of the American forces, and the critical role of intelligence in modern warfare. George's name was often included in these lessons, a testament to the unsung heroes who operated behind the scenes. For George, knowing that future generations understood the importance of Midway was reward enough. The legacy of Midway extended beyond its historical significance. It influenced the development of military strategy and technology in profound ways. The emphasis on intelligence, communication, and technological innovation became cornerstones of modern military doctrine. George often reflected on how far these fields had come since the days when he painstakingly decoded messages by hand. In his later years, George devoted himself to preserving the memory of those who had served in the war. He contributed to oral history projects, sharing his experiences with historians and archivists. His stories painted a vivid picture of the human element in the battle, the camaraderie, the tension, and the resolve to overcome immense challenges. These accounts became invaluable resources for future generations seeking to understand the sacrifices made during the war. By the time George passed away in the early 1990s, he had left behind a legacy of quiet heroism. His name appeared on memorials and plaques dedicated to the heroes of Midway. For those who knew him, George Anderson was not just a war hero. He was a reminder of the extraordinary things ordinary people could achieve when driven by purpose and determination. Even after his passing, George's contributions continued to inspire. His story became a symbol of the power of collaboration, intelligence, and perseverance. It served as a reminder that history is shaped not just by grand strategies and powerful leaders, but also by individuals who rise to the occasion in critical moments. George Anderson stood amidst the crowd on a bright summer day, years after the war. The streets were adorned with flags, and the air hummed with the sounds of celebration. A military parade, honoring the veterans of World War II, made its way through the city, drawing cheers from onlookers. Though George had avoided the spotlight for much of his life, today he stood with his fellow veterans, wearing a modest pin that marked his service in the Pacific Theater. The memories of Midway, though distant, remain vivid. As the parade paused for a moment of silence to honor the fallen, George's mind drifted back to the cramped confines of the radio room. He could still hear the hum of the equipment, the faint crackle of intercepted signals, and the muffled voices of his comrades as they worked tirelessly to decode critical messages. It was there, in those tense hours, that George had intercepted a signal that confirmed the Japanese fleet's plans, a single piece of information that had shifted the balance of power in the Pacific. What if I hadn't caught that signal? He often wondered. It was a question that haunted and humbled him. The weight of that hypothetical lingered, a reminder of how fragile the threads of history could be. Yet, as he looked at the faces of younger generations lining the streets, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Their lives, their futures. These were the reasons why so many had fought and sacrificed. The parade resumed, and as the veterans marched past, the crowd erupted in applause. Children waved small flags and families cheered. George noticed a boy perched on his father's shoulders, pointing excitedly at the line of veterans. The father leaned in to explain something, and George caught the words heroes and Midway. A quiet smile spread across his face. Though he had never sought recognition, knowing that the story of Midway continued to inspire was reward enough. The culmination of the ceremony took place at a monument dedicated to the Battle of Midway. Its inscriptions bore the names of ships, squadrons, and individuals who had played a role in the victory. George approached the monument slowly, his hands tracing the etched letters. Among them, he found the names of friends and colleagues who hadn't returned. He paused, bowing his head in silent tribute. Nearby, a historian gave a short speech about the legacy of the battle. She spoke of the strategic brilliance of leaders like Admiral Chester Nimitz, the bravery of the aviators, and the tireless efforts of those behind the scenes. She mentioned George by name, recounting his role in deciphering the critical message that had altered the course of the war. The crowd turned to look at him, their applause a wave of gratitude. Later that evening, George sat on a park bench, watching the sunset. The sky, streaked with hues of orange and red, reminded him of the fires that had engulfed the Pacific during the war. He thought of the lives lost, the courage displayed, and the lessons learned. His thoughts settled on one enduring truth. Peace, though fragile, was worth every effort to preserve. As he rose to leave, George noticed a young man hesitating nearby, holding a notebook. The man approached nervously and introduced himself as a student writing a paper on the Battle of Midway. He asked George if he could share his experiences. George hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Together, they sat on the bench, and George began to recount the story, not just of codes and signals, but of the people who had made victory possible. In the years that followed, George's story became part of the collective memory of the war. His reflections on the price of freedom and the importance of vigilance were shared in classrooms, museums, and documentaries. The lessons of Midway, of resilience, ingenuity, and unity, continued to resonate. George Anderson passed away peacefully in his sleep a few years later, leaving behind a legacy of quiet heroism. At his funeral, a Navy honor guard presented his family with a folded flag, a symbol of the nation's gratitude. Among the attendees were veterans, historians, and students who had been touched by his story. His name was etched onto the Midway Memorial, joining those of his comrades. Beneath it was a simple inscription, a signal caught, a legacy preserved, for peace, for memory, for the future. And so, the story of George Skipper Anderson, the radio operator who saved Midway, became a timeless reminder of how even the smallest actions can echo through history. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps this community growing and motivates me to bring you more incredible stories.